Welcome to B Shifter. I'm John Vance, your host. On this episode, Nick Brunacini, Josh Blum, and Jeff King are analyzing the brand new Mayday data just released on Don Abbott's project, Mayday.net. 2021 proved to be a little more of the same with some new twists, so we'll break down that new information, and we're also going to include a link to projectmayday.net so you can get that information for yourself as well. If you agree that we can't learn enough about Maydays, this episode is for you. So let's get us started on B Shifter. So we are here with Josh, Jeff, and Nick, and today we are going to be talking about some newly released Mayday information, how it correlates to Blue Card, and how we are already reacting to some of that.
One thing is I think we start off with just, again, recognizing the work that Don and Bev have done on this project, and the whole piece of them taking a big bite of a sandwich and, chewing it up, and then they just keep carrying it forward, but that they've expanded their working group, and that it continues to expand, like who all's involved. And it's truly a project to capture data, and it's not two people sitting in a dark room, mad scientists just coming up with something and throwing it out against the wall. It's truly a process that they're going through to capture all the data. So, I mean, there's 24 plus people that are involved with how they capture the data, how they review the data, doctors, fire chiefs, ops chiefs, captains, lieutenants, firefighters, radio specialists, people on NFPA committees. So they got a broad range of people that are, working through all of this data that they've captured from 2015 to 2021 that we're going to talk about today.
Is 2021 more of the same? Are we seeing some emerging trends? Are you seeing anything that reinforces what we've already been saying? What are we seeing as far as the data goes now?
I mean, the numbers, when that report first came out, I couldn't believe how big the number was of how many Maydays they actually have now. So Jeff's got a pretty good breakdown of what we've looked at and analyzed so far. So
yeah, the numbers coming in this year are significantly different than what we saw at the end of the 2020. That you're talking almost 13,000 Maydays that have been gathered from career departments. For those that aren't familiar with Project Mayday, that you've got really two different sets of stats. You've got the stuff coming in from the career departments, and then you've got the stuff on the other side that comes from the combination and or volunteer departments. And that data is separated into two different categories. So when you visit the projectmayday.net website, you can download data specific to the type of fire service you're involved with.
Do you look at anything cross-pollinating between the career service and the volunteer? Did you see any themes going back and forth there?
When you look at the stuff going back and forth, there is some pretty interesting information. But I think what we have on ours is it ties back into our information is the stuff pertaining to some of the career departments. But you do see some vacillation between some of the data. It may not be as high in one category as it is in career, but the career department really has some pretty interesting information that's coming out of the data that he collected through 2021.
One of the big things that I saw was how often an air transfill is either being done, how often RIT bags are being deployed. Was that information surprising to you guys when you looked at it? How often that is actually happening in the field?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll break it down, even further. But when you look at almost 13,000 Maydays, and I think maybe almost 3,000 times the air transfill bag was actually deployed and used due to an air issue, and then you tie that number to how many times there's actually an air issue inside the building, low or out of air, the number of how many times the air transfill was used approaches almost 100%. I mean, that it was actually being deployed, it was actually being used, and it appears is making a difference. And, we really didn't have that number before. And we hear it a lot on the road when we're doing classes. It's like, well, I would just grab them and drag them out. And it's like, well, it's not so easy as just grabbing somebody and dragging them out. If they're out of air and you don't get air on them, they don't have long. You don't go too long without taking a breath before you're no longer with us.
No, and the air problems really represented 16% of the types of Maydays. It became the number 2 category in the types of Maydays through 2021 data. And when you dive deeper into the types of air problems, you had roughly 47% were the low air problems. You had 38% of the folks that were running out of air, and then you had 6% were face piece and 3% regulator. When you go into a little bit deeper into some of that data, 71% of the people who went into the structure reported having a full bottle. So you had a large number of folks who are going into the buildings ahead of time who did not have a full air bottle. And I think that's a huge thing to talk about. One of the things that Josh talked about was with the transfill, that you're using it now almost 3,800 times. 3,781 was the number of times it was used. For low air, 2,746. Out of air, 1,035. Replace 664 face pieces and replace 117 regulators. And that's all out of the information of part of that RIT bag that was being deployed. I think the bigger thing, some of the things that you look at, again, the air management, where it's taking place, 45% of the time that's happening in commercial occupancy. Residential is roughly around 39%, the multi-unit apartment complex sitting around 16%. So those were some pretty significant findings to be able to go through and look at it from a data standpoint.
Jeff, it was interesting about the mask replacement, the regulator replacement piece of it. So when you start putting all of it together, and we really try to tie all this data together, and we look at how many times people fell partially through the roof or fell through a floor or through the floor, and then tie that back to how many times was their mask or regulator, helmet, and so on dislodged. Those two start coming together. So it's an air management issue. And then it becomes, then they fall through the floor. So it's like a double whammy, right? I mean, they fell through the
absolutely.
Floor. They were already low on air maybe, or maybe not, but when their mask came off, that became an air issue, or when their regulator became dislodged, it became an air issue. So there's a lot of ways of connecting those two together when you look at the falls through the roof or falls through the floor working above a working fire.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at the career statistics, you've really got 2 different presentations to go through. And when you go through the front piece of it, you're really looking at the high percentage types of Maydays. When you get into the second part, you can get into some more of the specifics. But one of the things that you're speaking to is the number of people who either fell through a roof or fell into a basement. You're talking 80 plus, 84% sometimes of those people had either dislodged or lost their face mask when they were falling through. And a very high percentage of them were not in that self-rescue category. Somebody had to come in there and provide assistance to them. So being able to go through all this information and go kind of point to point on it is a little challenging at times, but it's definitely worth it for those who are wanting to be able to, like John is saying, be able to identify those trends and see what's happening.
When you guys are talking about air regulator failures or face piece failures, I just want to be clear on this. And I couldn't find this in Don's new data. Maybe or maybe you found it. Are those equipment failures by and large? So this isn't the Boeing 757 needing to be recalled. This is user error that is causing the face piece or the regulator to be replaced. Is that correct?
Oh, I mean, I think it's a risk assessment piece. Are we where we should be? Are we where we shouldn't be? Sometimes maybe a training issue, which really connects back to that whole decision-making piece. What are we really doing inside this space? With that said, I'm going to quote a piece that's inside of Abbott's report from Johnny Peters. There's a tendency to believe that since a certain practice has thus far not killed us, that's an acceptable practice. And it's like, we see the same thing over and over and over and over again, and we just refuse to learn until we experience it ourselves, it seems. And we talk a lot about we shouldn't have to bump our head ourselves to learn. Like, don't do that. That's going to hurt. Or in some cases, it may kill you. But we just keep doing the same things over and over and over again.
There's 2 different things almost going on, it sounds like. Is one of them, as you get into positions and it tests your gear, So you're falling through things, you're exposing it to a higher level of destruction just with the conditions we're in. I wonder how many of the air transfills are because we just outworked our air supply and got stuck inside. So that's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy then. If we're going to go in, we're going to run out of air, and then I'm going to need somebody to bring me in fresh air so I can do whatever. That isn't an evolution. I mean, they're almost practicing Maydays is really what it amounts to. If you're routinely, that became one of the issues that we had to fix moving forward when we did this coming out of Southwest supermarkets, was low air alarms, vibra alerts going off, and using some kind of a work cycle that you weren't allowed to run out of air. And that's really was when we implemented that in my fire department. Up to that point, our training academy kept teaching the recruits how to run out of air inside the building and outperform their SCBA using their turnouts. So that's inappropriate. So just those practices where we teach people how to do that. They don't teach scuba divers how to do that. They don't teach skydivers. No, you really don't need the parachute. If you just focus on support work and being a man, it'll fix everything. So we kind of tie ourselves into these knots, just outperforming the safety systems we have.
Well, the data drives us to the out of air, data from the report. They asked the question, why did you run out of air? I thought I had enough air to exit 91% of the time. They thought they had enough air to exit. So, we talk a lot about it at the Mayday workshop. We talk about it on Thursdays during, what we're doing with Blue Card cert labs and everything else that we do, that there's a task level responsibility, a tactical level responsibility, and really a strategic level responsibility when it comes to air management. The task level responsibility of when you get, it's 33, 33, 33 is the, what the air management standard lines up to be. And, when we say that, they look at us like we got 10 heads. Like, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. And the last class we did, I think we brought it up, and people were like, well, they literally told us that you work until your bell goes off. And when your bell goes off, that's when it's time to leave. And it's like, no, that's not when it's time to leave.
It's all wrong.
And the standard, Jeff has the details on it, but basically the standard says if your low air alarm goes off and you're still inside the IDLH, basically it should be treated as a Mayday event. Like it doesn't say it's a Mayday. It says it should be treated as if it's a Mayday event because you are into your emergency reserve about getting out of the building. So are you or are you not going to get out? But we hear it over and over again, people operating until their bell goes off. And I think we can tie that back to a lot of stuff we talk about with the residential. We get confident at residential because it hasn't hurt us or killed us before. So we just keep on doing, that same thing over and over and over again.
Well, I think a lot of it too is, you said it earlier, is first of all, we call it a 30-minute bottle. It ain't a 30-minute bottle. It's a 15-minute bottle. That's how long it lasts. And then when you do the 33% thing and say your working time is 5 minutes, well, they don't teach that in the academy. I don't know what academy they teach it in, if any. And so there's this disconnect between the executive level leadership and then operational leadership of the fire department and the level that actually trains the incoming firefighters. And it's almost like, no, you can't access us and we're going to teach the old ways still. So this 5-minute thing is not that we didn't sign up for that. And we're going to go until our bell rings and all the rest. So we have some of the blame for, just organizationally as a fire department. So, and I don't know what you do to fix that, where like you have people at the top saying, no, this got to be fixed. Garrison talked about it in the last Chiefs Challenge. Is there's things happening that I had no clue. And what it is summarily some task level operator that's responsible for training young people says, no, this is what we're doing because this is what I believe in. And
Well, the other thing that I've heard recently at a class is we have a policy for commercial fires, air management, but we don't apply it to residential fires because we can get out. Well, what happens? You revert to your training. We go to mostly residential fires, and people are going to bring that air management philosophy with them at a commercial fire. Most of the classes, half of them, I would say, don't have an air management policy in place. And then there's a few select around me that have commercial only, which is just ridiculous.
Well, you see some places that say, well, if we go to a commercial, then we're going to swap out and do the hour bottles. And you think, no, you're not.
Again, this is a little morsel, a little nugget that exists in the data that if you don't dig for it, you're not going to find it. You're talking about the cylinder size. 6% of the Maydays are happening on the quote unquote 30-minute cylinder. 66% are happening on the 45. 25% are happening with the 60. So we've built these models, these work models based on this idea of what we could get done and how deep we could go based on a 30-minute cylinder. And then at some point, because we needed to get more work done on the fire ground and because our gear allowed us to go a little bit deeper, we automatically, everybody just jumped to the 4,500 cylinder. Well, everything that we're doing is way past what we thought we could get out when 78% of the people are saying that they were deeper into the structure than they realized. And that, like Josh had said, 91% thought they had enough air to exit. Nobody is practicing air management with their particular bottles that they're using. And the idea that we're going to jump because we're going to a high rise or a bigger commercial building, that we're going to jump into an hour tank, we are just asking for more problems. It goes back to what Josh was saying with, Johnny Peters at HFD. It is the normalization of deviance. We know it's a problem, but because it hasn't bitten us in the ass yet, we just keep moving with it as if it's successful.
Yeah, it is. In fact, it's endorsed almost. Keep doing this, but it's like it's almost like a superstitious baseball pitcher. If I don't drink a cup of chicken blood before the 7th inning, we're going to lose the game, or change my underwear, cut my hair, whatever it is. It has no effect on the outcome. It makes us feel better because we think we can control something, I guess, on the front end.
Well, another little number off the air management piece of this is they were assigned a task that they had to complete, so that's why they ran out of air. That's what they said. It's like, we had to complete this task, so we ran out of air. It's like, well, you didn't have enough air clearly to complete the task. So, we talk a lot about this whole round trip ticket mentality, which lines up with, a whole lot of things, but it's like the air management part of that is no, if you're going in, you have to have enough air to make sure you get out and that you don't get to that, emergency reserve air that's left in your bottle. So that mentality of I can just tie it all the way back to the strategic decision-making model. The critical factors are not aligning with the work that you're doing. You're not making any decisions. It's just here's the playbook. This is what we do. One size fits all. It's what we do every single time. Mm-hmm. And then we're not surprised, but the firefighters and fire departments are often surprised when, well, that didn't work. And it's like, well, we learned about air management in March 14th, 2021.
Yeah.
Or 2001. And here it is, 2022. So,
well, and the other part of that, and this was an element that went with it, is the IC, I cannot manage your air supply. But what I can manage is your rotation in and out of the hazard zone. So we did that as part of training. It said, no, if you assign an engine or whatever company to go do something inside an IDLH, is you got to have a timer in your head somewhat to know. And that's one of the reasons for elapsed time notifications. Well, I've got people operating so long, if I'm not hearing from them in 7.5 minutes after I think they've gone on air, that's kind of where the connection needs to be made. So it affects the whole thing from the strategic level, the task level, and the tactical level. In fact, this is one of the reasons we go to a tactical level supervision as fast as we do, is because there's no better way to manage that than within the warm zone of the attack position. It just becomes an easier thing to do at that point. So if we don't quickly put the fire out, we got to be building an organization that allows us to manage people's air supplies more effectively.
One of the things that I think was really fascinating in the second part of the Project Mayday is they refer to it as mission myopia, that you become fixated on this tactical objective. I'm going to get in and do what I need to do. And they lose all sense of focus on anything else. Nothing's going to get in the way of them getting to the fire. And I think this is something that is synonymous with everybody, is that we have such a huge desire, a drive to get in and do the right thing, but we're not thinking of any exit strategy. We're not thinking in the back end of it. It's almost as if we get the fire put out and now what are we supposed to do? There's no round trip plan for any of these folks. And it's really starting to show up in some of this data.
We've talked a lot about air management. So, let's jump back to the biggest one, the loss separated from a hose line, right when you enter. So 18.3%. of their Maydays, 2,247 of them lost, separated.
Yeah, 18% of them are lost or separated from the hose line, and 60% of those folks came in without a hose. 60% entered without a hose. And when you get into the hose separation issues and you look at some of it, 86% of the departments have either an SOP or an SOG that allows the firefighters to enter the building without a hose line. So not only are you allowing it, you're condoning it, and it's becoming kind of a standard operating process. 60% no hose line, 47% were taking place in commercial, 38% were residential, 14% were the multi-unit apartment complexes. That's just, it's amazing what you're looking at.
You know, the commercial doesn't surprise me because, you know, big building and they just get, you know, off the hand line or separated from the hand line, or they were in there trying to, you know, take residential tactics to commercial building fire, and you're going to do a search of a Kroger grocery store, and it doesn't work. Or the Walmart, you know, you're not going to search 68,000 square feet or 98,000 square feet of a building. So, you know, that doesn't surprise me. But a number that's on there that I had to dig into further was the whole residential 38%, 862 times lost, separated. And that number right there says it all about why we continue to stay connected to that hand line and what we talk about, task level accountability, voice, vision, and touch. Company officers have to make sure they're accountable for their people and that they are indeed accounting for them. And, you know, until people really dive in and look at that, they're like, well, it's a 1,500 square foot house. How did they possibly get lost in there? And we've experienced plenty of line of duty deaths, people lost in those homes just in the last couple of years. Again, we have to learn from everybody else's experiences before we have our own. And what we hear a lot is that's bullshit, and I don't know how that could possibly happen to them. And it's like, well, the numbers are the numbers. Those are real. It's data.
We have some prime examples of crews entering a burning building with a 2.5 gallon pressurized water can with the intention of doing a search with 2.5 gallons of water. And they quickly become overcome. Now, and we're looking at the volunteer data. I'm looking at that right now, and they're 24.4% lost and separated from a hose line, and 33% of those came in without a hose line. So they're doing the same things, maybe on a little lesser degree, but it's where you're getting your influence from. And I'd be pretty interested to see at some point what regions are doing certain tactics.
You know, we're the fire department. If the building's on fire, you should take an attack line inside the thing. That's the way the thing works. Now, if they were cops, it would be the same thing as, oh, I'm not going to carry my gun with me. I'm just going to leave it in the car and I'll forget it half the time. It doesn't make any sense. It's almost like we're rushing in to witness what's going on inside, because if you don't have an attack line with you, what are you going to do? I'm going to go in and search. Well, you're the fourth due company. I mean, I think that piece of real estate has passed us by in the incident operation at this point. It's almost like everybody that shows up to the scene's got their own incident action plan in some of these things. When you start reading the Mayday stuff, it's like none of them were ever connected together. They weren't connected to any kind of incident action plan that anybody was managing in most cases.
Yeah, it's culturally or, departmentally accepted freelancing. Somehow it's condoned that everybody gets off with their own plan. It's not part of an organized IAP, and the folks just start going to work.
Well, and they say
somebody's got to show up and clean up the shit show.
Yeah, and they all say, well, if you know what you're doing, if you're competent, you show up to the scene and know what needs to be done. And you're like, well, no. I mean,
16% went in with a tagline. And the department said that was okay. So of these, they just went in. Where does a tagline have a place inside a structure fire?
When we were doing the different tests, when we were coming out of the Southwest supermarket thing, that's one of the things we looked at was wide area rope searches. Because you heard that all the time. It was a popular thing to say. It's like vent enter search. There's just these buzzwords you throw out there and say, okay, we're just going to go in with ropes and we're going to do a grid search. We practiced that in different kind of buildings, and all the evaluators, the people that actually ran the drills, the training captains, came back and said, what we should do with all the ropes, search ropes we have, are cut them into 1 foot pieces so we can never use them like this again. You're tying yourself in knots. You're not on an attack line. You're going to run out of air. The whole thing's ridiculous. Somebody came in with the thermal imager and said, well, I just searched the whole room. In 10 seconds, I saw what there was to see. Well, no, we didn't physically touch every.
Another big one that for me was, and being from basement land and being from an area where we've had 3 line of duty deaths from people falling into the basement, the whole increase of people falling into the basement, 7% increase from 2019 to 2021, that accounts for almost 16% of the Maydays. 2,000 times fell into the basement. I can't wrap my mind around that. I just don't. I don't understand why we continue to do these same things. We've had several line of duty deaths in the last 9 months in the United States from firefighters falling into the basement, and we missed the critical factors. We just get there and we take this action. And it's just what we do, and I'm on this mission, and I'm so focused on that you don't see the big picture. And again, I can't figure out why we can't learn from other people's experience, and we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And there's been, in the last couple of weeks, John, we've seen a few of these back and forth about basement fires, and a lot of people are on we shouldn't be going down these interior steps on a working basement fire, because to get to there, you're crawling over a working fire. So what's really going on in the basement? And then on the flip side of it, we have people that is our job. That is what we do. Well, it's not our job to go to a building and die. That is not our job. You're going to a fire in a basement. And when the basement's on fire, it is not survivable space. I mean, it's like, what are you really doing? What are you accomplishing? And we have so much information out there about floor collapse and, all of this stuff from Project Mayday that's out there about, floor collapses and how many times they're falling through the floor or partially through the floor. And I mean, we're just missing it, but we continue to take this same approach that we always took in the past.
It would be interesting as these advocates that this is our job. And if we don't get in there and do this right away, and, people are going to die and all the rest of it. In those systems, once they fall through the floor, what happens to the search or the fire attack, whatever they were doing before the Mayday occurred?
Oh, all the attention gets taken to the firefighter that's having the problem, and none of the other work is.
Virtually, it is all abandoned. Is our first reaction to it. In fact, if you're making physical rescues of like civilians and somebody has a Mayday, good luck, because a number of them will go to the Mayday away from the other. So it's almost like the excuse we're using right off the bat is just bullshit, because once we get in trouble, then it's, we're in trouble and we have to fix it now. So
how many times when we have a basement fire is a 360 not completed?
It would be interesting to see of those Maydays that occurred in basement fires in houses, how many didn't get the 360?
Well, when you look at the basement and again you go deeper into that data, 42% of those folks knew that there was a basement fire. They knew it was there. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't something that just jumped up from underneath them. It was fully aware of what was going on. 67% of them had only one firefighter on the floor at the time of the collapse. So it was just one person walked in, standing on the floor right above a working structure fire, and the floor either gives out or they step into a hole. It's unacceptable. It's an unnecessary loss. Truly. 70% of the time, 70% of the time that there was either no 360 or an incomplete 360 was performed. On all of these Maydays, 70% of the time that we're not getting a full 360. I spoke with John earlier today, listening to a situation, responding to a run the other day. It's a restaurant that's on fire. There's smoke coming out the front. It's coming through the eaves of the roof line. And they decide we're making an offensive attack. We're going to bust open the front door. We're going to take a hose line right through this restaurant. Get inside. There's no smoke in the restaurant. There's nothing. Go around back, finally commit to doing their 360, get on around back of it and realize that there's a barbecue pit in a residential area on the backside that's still producing smoke. And that smoke was just coming over, laying over the roof line. So because we don't get a 360, we end up doing damage to somebody's house.
Well, I mean, people say that the size up takes too long. The 360 takes too long. I got to get in there. I got to do my job. And, you know, the 360 tells us so much information, and we got to train on that whole 360. And we got to use all the tools that are available. So, you know, we talk a lot about using a thermal imaging camera too when you're doing your 360, but you know, how often is the thermal imaging camera left on the dash of the fire truck? And, you know, a lot of that ties back to, well, they never trained us on it, so I don't use it, and I'm not going to carry that thing around, or I don't need it. So, I mean, there's a whole training aspect and component and piece connected to that of what are we really doing, and why are we doing the 360? And there's plenty of data and information out there of why we do the 360, and plenty of information of the value and what we find when we do a 360.
You know what takes a long time is investigating a line of duty death. Let's just be honest. When you look at Project Mayday and you go to the front of Project Mayday and they talk about that this is really in remembrance of the Brett Tarver fire, that they're trying to honor the loss of a firefighter by investigating all these Maydays. And you look at Phoenix and Phoenix's response to the Brett Tarver fire. You're talking 5-6 years of intensely and immensely getting into every nook and cranny of fire department operations to understand why they did what they did and then create a path out of that tragedy. What takes a long time is recovering from the line of duty death. 360s don't take that much time, but having to recover from not doing it, that's costing the fire service millions and millions of dollars and tons of time.
And most of the basement fires we go to, once we do a 360, we do not deploy on the alpha side. We're redeploying to some other side of the house, either through an egress window. We're going to make a quick hit from the outside, or a walkout. It's going to allow us to actually fight the fire and mitigate the problem.
We make money every time we show up to the incident scene and we act like the fire department. When we show up to the scene and we act like the fire department, secondly, we always get into trouble. We're going to do support work first. We're going to do a search first. We're going to do this first, that first. We have to rush to do X, Y, and Z. Get to the scene, do a complete size up, attack the fire, and it goes out. When you look at the numbers, is just the time you're there. That 360 took another 15, 30 seconds. Well, so what I did is in the front end, I invested a minute and 45 seconds, 2 minutes to figure out exactly what's going on while the rest of the crew's getting the attack line in place. Now we know where to apply water. And 5 minutes later, the fire's over. It's out. That's what happens most of the time. If we would just stick to that, that makes us money every time. You're not one of Abbott's statistics anymore. That's kind of should be the goal for all of us. It's an interruption. First of all, it exposes us to a huge risk. It doesn't produce any good outcome, and it screws up our operation. We almost act like, well, this is what it means to win World War II, and the Nazis were shelling us, and we did this, and we survived and overcame. And no, we're a goddamn fire department, man. We show up and we put the fire out. That's what it is.
Well, we saw one stat go down, but we're still doing it, is falling off or through a roof.
Yeah, it's good to see that we're actually, for one reason or another, the numbers went down. And it was good to see the reduction that you had from the previous years. You're down to roughly now 14% falls off or through the roof. Again, high number, 68% of those folks are just walking on the roof. More importantly, 75% only had one firefighter on the roof when they fell through. Again, high number of them residential structures, not a high number of the commercial structures. So I think this is something that's just tied innately back to our DNA. This is just what we do. We get up on the roof and we start cutting holes, whether it's needed, whether it helps, whether it's beneficial or not. It's just something that, again, Nick spoke to it pretty clearly, that we're just going to go off on these task level jobs. This is what we do. We're going to engage in support work before anything else needs to be done or even part of a functional plan.
I believe that part of the reason why we're seeing a little bit of a decline in those numbers is we are hearing it more and more as we're on the road, in a different state, fire department, region every single week doing training with them, that, they're realizing through training that maybe they shouldn't be there based off the critical factors. And, so they're getting somebody to the roof, but, you're hearing incident commanders say on the radio, truck 19, stand by on getting on the roof. It's the critical factor based decision making. Like, do I really need them to do what they're about to do? So I think that's helping because there's training out there and people are starting to finally realize, I think on that part of it, that we don't always have to take every single action on the fire ground. I remember Chief Brunacini used to, the customer wants you to draw a straight line from the firehouse to their house and put water on the fire. And he would do the whole detour thing and draw like 20 lines. And he was like, the problem is we take all these detours before we actually do what we're supposed to do, which comes back to what you're talking about, the support work. I mean, we're doing all these other support work things and we lose focus on actually just putting the fire out.
How often are we seeing truck companies, ladder trucks involved in a Mayday now versus engines?
So when you look at the new data, roughly 54% of the time you're dealing with engine companies, 45% you're dealing with ladders. Now, everybody knows that ladder is a much smaller percentage of operations in any department, but they're a very high category of the Maydays. When you look at the arrival order, 57%, it's usually that first unit on scene, 26% the second unit on scene. 83% roughly of the Maydays are involving, one of the first two units. That's pretty staggering. When you look at the number of firefighters on scene, you're looking 9 to 15, roughly 24%. When you get that 16 to 22 firefighters on scene, roughly 33%. When you get up approaching around 30 firefighters on scene, now you're talking around 26%. So you can start to see some of these trends as more people are getting on scene. You're starting to have some other issues. And one of the things that I thought was very, very startling, especially coming from our system, 54% of the Maydays had 2 or more command transfers, not just IC number 1 assumption command and passing to IC number 2, but somewhere along the line, there was another third command transfer. And when you look at, on scene time and when Maydays are occurring, all these changing of commands is creating instability in that process. And this is where people are getting hurt.
Now, here on the volunteer side, it's pretty interesting because their breakdown on apparatus assignment involved 92% engines on the volunteer side. So very few truck company, and because probably most of them aren't doing truck company work. They're going to put out the fire, and that's why a majority of their Maydays are with engine companies.
Well, volunteers don't have nearly the deployment capability, generally speaking, that a career fire department does. So, and when you look at that, so they have fewer resources and then personnel. So they really need to maximize whatever actions they take to solve the problem that they're facing at the time. And again, for all of us, that mostly involves putting the fire out. So that's what their focus is. The volunteers don't do nearly the support work typically that the career service does, just because they don't have the staffing to do it, essentially.
While we're talking
They
about
don't
that,
seem to take as many detours.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's yeah. Uh-huh.
So another stat on that whole engines and ladders and response time and who was involved, 86% of the time, Jeff, a chief officer's on the scene. And
86% of the time.
It's alarming that 86% of the time there was somebody there, but it doesn't say that they were in command. Well, they're in command because I'm here, and because I'm here, I'm in command. But what are you really in command of? So, I mean, you really start, when you delve into that data, it's like, what in the world what was going on? And then we always talk about that number linking back to, I think it's 37% of the time, the strategic IC missed the Mayday on the first transmission. So it's like another alarming piece. And then that one ties back to a strategic IC or a chief officer is there and they missed the Mayday. Well, when we look at those two and then we tie that back to where was the strategic IC, what is that new number, Jeff? Where was the strategic IC when the Mayday, like outside of the vehicle?
When you look at the strategic IC, let me pull that up for you here real quick. So roughly 67% were in sidewalk command on a portable radio. and 26% were outside the command vehicle, just behind the truck, working from a command board or something like that. That's a large number of the folks that are outside that controlled environment where sound is good, where the radio is strong, you're protected from the elements, you don't have any distractions from anything else. And when you look at that, 38% roughly of the Mayday traffic was missed for no apparent reason whatsoever, just missed, didn't hear it. And then 29% of the Maydays were initially not even reported as a Mayday. So it was just other radio traffic that's going on the fireground. Those are two pretty big, bulky numbers that if we're not paying attention and the information that's coming out incorrect, we're really putting ourselves behind an 8 ball and being able to respond to these incidents.
So I think, we've talked a lot about really a lot of decision making, right? The evaluation of critical fireground factors, doing your 360, understanding what's really happening within the incident, using that strategic decision making model. And it truly seems like that is a component and piece that is missing. And a lot of that ties back to the NIOSH 5, which we can talk more about later. But another alarming thing that's inside the report is this whole piece right here. That is the
I had the same thing queued up.
How many firefighters are being hurt training on bailing out of windows, using some sort of bailout system. And the data right from their report, in the last 6 years, we've had 6 firefighters killed, 31 firefighters disabled, and 157 or more that they got reported that have been injured. And I think that comes back to, a lot of other people's sayings. And how about we just put the fire out and we can quit jumping out of windows? If you're jumping out of the window, it was not a survivable space. Why were you there? And but we keep on training on all these things, and we keep on training. Oh, we're going to put up 37 ground ladders across this building in case somebody's got to bail out. Well, how about we put a little bit more focus on not doing the support work, and we put a little bit more focus on putting the fire out. And once we're working towards that and actually being successful, we can do that support work piece. So the whole training piece on this task level, this is cool to fly out of a window and onto a ladder.
Occupationally, I don't understand how you could even describe this to any lucid human being and be thought of anything other than an utter fool and idiot. To say this is going to be our plan B is run as fast as you can at a window and dive headfirst out of it. That's how you're going to escape.
Participation in Project Mayday is completely voluntary for a lot of folks. And probably you're looking at less than 10% of the Maydays are actually, that statistic is being gathered. So when we talk about 6 killed, when we talk about 31 disabled and 157 injured, how many injuries didn't get reported? How many times did people doing that drill did it not get reported? John, I think you said it 100% right. Nobody should die in training. Nobody should get hurt in training. That's not what we're trying to do. But we keep wanting to practice these outlandish things that make our heart rate go up and are really exciting and all kinds of fun. But at the end of the day, the thing that we need to be most proficient at is getting water on the fire. That's it. That's what we've got to be good at.
During the front end of my career, half the firefighter fatalities were from training. The line of duty deaths were fires that we set in training settings. So, and God bless us, that's improved. In fact, it was outlawed for a long time. The NFPA made a standard for doing burns. It was such a problem that.
Well, because we were soaking couches with jet fuel. Literally.
Yeah.
Fire departments were buying jet fuel for their required structures. And because, kerosene isn't good enough.
Yeah, we need more oily smoke.
It's fun when it blows up.
So I think that let's talk about this whole gas explosion thing, because that's another one that's 2020 to 2021, an increase of Maydays at gas explosions, 9.4% of the Maydays that have been reported, with 2 line of duty deaths in 2021. At gas explosions. And that encounters natural gas and propane, but 73% of the time the firefighters were notified of a gas leak from dispatch. So they knew what they were going to. Firefighters informed gas smell on arrival. It's like, well, then you have a gas leak somewhere. There's the perfect mixture.
65% of those folks smelt it upon arrival. And then 54% just went in anyway and started doing what they do.
47% of the time they were doing some sort of air monitoring. And, you know, the Mayday number that's a giant number, you know, with these gas leaks. And I think it's another one of those things of it hadn't hurt us in the past. So we think we become the energy company and we're going to go solve the problem. And we carry vice grips and we carry the anti-static tape still. And we're going to fix this line, or we're going to go in there and fix their furnace for them, or whatever it is. And, well, when we were building the Blue Card Hazmat IC module, we talked to anybody and everybody we could talk to that worked for an energy company that delivered gas. And we'd ask them, what do you want us to do when we get there? And their answer was basically the same thing that it says when you call the emergency number for Duke Energy. If you're a resident, get out and stay out until we get there to solve the problem. And basically their answer to us was, you're the fire department. If you can isolate it via turning the meter off, maybe do that. But otherwise, we want you to evacuate and isolate and stay away. And if you touch it and something happens, you own it. Well, we just continue to do the same thing over and over again. And like we have to solve this problem, and we really create bigger problems or we create more problems. So there's clearly a best practice of what we should be doing there. I mean, we talk about it. These gas leaks should start off defensive, and then we figure out what's going on. And then from that point, you know, we'll isolate, evacuate, and maintain control of it until the energy company gets there. And that's what they get paid to do.
Well, you were talking earlier about a big fire department that is very strong tactically. And part of it is when they promote you to officer, they take you out of the field for a week, 2 weeks, and they say, when you respond to this kind of incident, as the officer, this is the actions you're going to take, right? Mm-hmm. We can do the same thing with houses with basements and say, no, when you get to the scene of this is the actions you're going to take. We're going to eliminate the occurrences of these Maydays by eliminating the things that cause them. So it would be the same thing with gas. It's you just train people how to deal with these hazards without making them worse, essentially. And if it flies in the face of our former training, so be it. You got to retrain people then. It's just the way the stuff works. The world has changed quite a bit since our tactics were invented 2,500 years ago, or whenever the Romans started burning buildings. It's kind of where we came from. It's different today. They didn't have trusses and glues and adhesives and 2,000-degree flashovers in 3 minutes. That's a factor of modern life, a critical factor we have to live with. So we got to change our stuff to match that. I mean,
you mentioned, Josh, a couple of best practices on gas leaks. Where can somebody really find a lot of information on that and get honed into it? Because I think a lot of departments don't even have a policy to start off with on how they're going to address a natural gas leak or a propane gas leak.
Yeah, so just like Blue Card has SOPs for our structural firefighting stuff, we have Blue Card SOPs for hazardous materials response, and it's not hazmatology. It is for first due company officers. That's the mobile IC and then the strategic IC. So how do you keep yourself out of trouble until somebody else gets there that has a technical skill to solve the problem, whether it's the energy company or whether you're using a designated, specific hazmat team that's going to do something with whatever the event is. So, the Blue Card SOPs just lay it all right out there as far as how should we respond to natural gas, how should we respond to carbon monoxide emergencies, and just a piece on the carbon monoxide thing that everybody gets wrapped around. It's not a big deal. Well, it's not a big deal until you pull up on that incident and now you got 6 dead people in a hotel and that event just happened. And they're like, oh, we should have sent more than one person in a staff car to this event.
With a ticket book
to investigate something. And it's like, no, this is something different. So, it's everything from the alarm all the way up to a different event. So carbon monoxide, natural gas, inert compressed gas, CO2, and then, responding to explosive devices, which is really in a police event. And so, we've got SOPs that outlines all of that. Like, how do it's the management piece. It's not hazmatology. It's not hazmat IQ. It's not What does the hazmat tech or specialist do when they get there? It's the first due company officer, mobile IC. What do? How do they keep themselves out of trouble? How do they make sure that nobody else is going to get in trouble? Evacuate, isolate, all those pieces.
Because especially like a gas call, if we get ourselves in trouble, we're also getting the people in trouble that we were called to keep out of trouble. So that, the property owner, the residents at all. So that would be another good reason to take effective action that led to public safety.
Can we link up some of the NIOSH 5 to, some of the things that we see in Abbott's report? Because we should be learning from all of these Maydays. We shouldn't have to read a line of duty death report that is, really the worst thing that could happen, the line of duty death. We should learn from all these other things that are taking us down the path of leading us to line of duty death. So the falling through the floor, when we look at the first one, improper risk assessment. Let's just talk about improper risk assessment for a minute. Like, how does that line up to what we've talked about so far with air management, getting off the hand line? You didn't stretch a hand line. You fell through the roof. You fell through the floor. You were inside of the building that your meter told you shouldn't be in here, and we stayed inside.
That's all improper risk assessment. From the beginning of the shift to the time that they're on scene at these incidents, there's so many different of these items that are tied to an improper risk assessment. When you look at the top 5, the NIOSH top 5, and you talk about the improper risk assessment, the lack of incident command, a lack of accountability, inadequate communication, failure to follow established SOPs or training, that's just the top 5. And when you go through Project Mayday, these pieces of data all align with these top 5 problems. When you look at the other ones where you come out with a no 360 or incomplete 360, operating the wrong strategy, working directly above structure fires, separated from a hose line, entered without a hose line, air management issues, that's the kind of secondary sets of issues that NIOSH identifies with the problems. And this is littered with that data. So, whether you want to pull it from NIOSH and go through the reports and read all these reports and identify what folks are out there doing, or you want to go through Project Mayday, there should at least be enough information out there for organizations to commit to making a change to keeping their people safe. It doesn't seem to be that difficult because it all lines up what we're doing. And again, we're not finding new ways to hurt firefighters, but we keep repeating the same behaviors over and over and expecting somehow there to be a different outcome.
So I want to hit that lack of incident command again, because some people get wrapped around incident command. Well, 86% of the time there was a chief there. So, does that mean there was command?
No. In this issue of the magazine, we're doing after action reviews that were really old, almost 50 years old. And in the one we published in this last issue, one of the takeaways was just because the chief is on the scene, don't mean the chief is in command. And it was an issue at that fire 50 years ago when they were forming a strategic level and trying to figure out how does all this work. Well, I think it validated it. Somebody should be in command. So, and that was a deal back in the day where the chief would find out what was going on and say, well, I'm not taking it. You keep it. But it still needed to be commanded. The fire wasn't out. So I think that becomes kind of one of the triggers in the thing is if there's a hazard, you got to keep trying to improve command to some point. So when the chief gets there, there's no doubt about who's going to be in command. And then it's their responsibility. So it's you were the one with the plan and can affect what's going on at the incident scene.
So that next one of accountability, we talk about task, tactical, and strategic level accountability. Some people think the accountability is like a passport or some tag, and it's like, no, accountability is a whole lot of other things. So, Jeff, when we talk about task, tactical, strategic level accountability, what are we really talking about?
And I think this is one of the things, and again, this is a B-Shifter podcast, so I have no problem being honest with it. I think one of the things that Blue Card does that is absolutely phenomenal is having this tertiary level of accountability. And you start talking about the task level accountability, and that's being able, we all learn, it's probably in everybody who's listening to this SOP or SOG out there, that the company officer has to be able to maintain voice, vision, or touch of the people that they're coming into the hazard zone with. when you start moving, getting a walking boss in position and getting a division supervisor, a second chief in place who's running a division, now you're being able to keep track of those folks with the accountability tags and passports and making sure that you know who's in, who's come out, and where they're going. And then you have at the ultimate level, you have that, the IC who's got that 360-degree responsibility for everything, who makes sure they understand position and function of everybody on the fire ground. But I think the one thing that we have to remember is that all of us individually as firefighters on that fire ground we are a part of the safety system. And we have to be doing our part to ensure that we are safe as we are engaging into these atmospheres. And if the firefighter's not taking responsibility for themselves and ensuring that they've done everything they need to do, it's going to be very difficult for the captain to ensure what they need to do, for the division supervisor to ensure it when they're coming into working in that division, and for IC to maintain everything. We can't not have a sense of personal responsibility. So, when you look at Blue Card, we'll talk about 3 levels, but that 4th unspoken level is that firefighter's responsibility to keep themselves safe.
In Blue Card, we talk about red flag information. We get these red flags that are transmitted to us. And I think what's kind of interesting about what this report has, and it's always had, is the 15 phrases we hear right before a Mayday, or those phrases that should give an incident commander pause and for them to really dig into and pay attention to. And has that changed at all, or are we looking at different phrases, or are they still the same?
There was some changes in order, but it's really the same kind of top 10, top 15 phrases. One of the things you hear 86% of the time, we have fire above our heads. That's pretty significant. That's a pretty good finding. But again, kind of Nick talked about it earlier. How many things are you missing to get to this point? What was going on for you to completely miss that you've got fire rolling above your head? The second one at 78% was we have zero visibility. We can't see. Well, okay, that lends itself to a lot of problems. Number 3, we're running out of air. 73% we're running out of air. We've not found the seat of the fire. Okay, that's 66%. That's a pretty big one. We've got fire below us. That's 56%. So again, we've got some pretty big ones on the top 5. As we go through this middle ranking here, there's a hole in the floor or there's a collapse in the floor. Okay, well, we can't see what's going on, and then we find these holes, and we usually find them because we're right on top of them. That's an even bigger problem. We've got a lot of sprinklers going off. So we're probably in some kind of commercial entity, and you've got a whole lot of problems that happen when the sprinklers start going off, and we're dealing with all those problems. This is a hoarder house. When you're talking 1,486 of these Maydays took places in hoarder houses, that's a pretty big deal. It's happening a little bit more and more regularly than we were probably aware of for a while. It's getting really hot, and we're backing out, 41%. We're sending a firefighter out with a problem. So we're breaking accountability. We're not maintaining that touch, vision, or anything else with our firefighter. We're letting them exit, and we're going to keep in there. That's a problem. You get to the bottom 5, we've got a flashover. You missed a lot to get to that point. So the fact that we got 37% that can identify a flashover, that's pretty remarkable. We have a ceiling or roof collapse. So you're getting into a lot more traumatic stuff that's going on. We need more line to reach the fire. Somebody requesting to add a little bit more to it. Again, the air management issue just kind of makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up with that one. We've lost multiple windows, 27%, and our exit is blocked, 17%.
The first wave of them were pre-alerts. The last half of them were just Maydays. Okay, we lost the windows. Well, that's a Mayday. It's I have a flow path through half the building now. It's.
And that would fall in line with the 29% of the Maydays that were not originally transmitted as a Mayday. It was just information coming over the radio. Well, hey, you've got a Mayday happening. That's what's going on.
I always wondered, you would have a ladder go to the roof, and they'd cut a hole. And this is the old days, And they'd come back and they'd say, yeah, we got fire in the attic. We need to line up here. Really? So I'm supposed to magically snap a line to you up on the roof? Are you out of your mind? The other one I like is that we're low on air. We're running out of air. Yeah, well, that's a pretty bad thing because you're not going to be breathing in a minute. Leave the building. In the command post, I could do jack shit over that. The people in the front yard can't do anything about it. That's the deal where you need to get out of the building right now. In fact, you needed to get out about 5 minutes ago. See, those are the only way to manage those is not to have them happen to you. If they keep happening to you, you should look for a different line of work. It's only a matter of time.
Well, what you just described there is what we talk about, that no level can outperform the other.
Yeah.
Strategic and tactical cannot fix the air management problem
No.
that the task level failed to recognize, and now it's too late, except for to say exactly what you said of, you got to get out of the building right now and let me know when you are out, or I'm going to send, and I might just send help on right now with an air transfill bag to make sure you get out. But that's the only answer, which is totally reactionary instead of, oh, I'm at 33%. I've used over 33% of my air. I need to start to exit the building so that I can make sure that I get out of here.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we trained, as Jeff described the recovery processes of not letting this happen to you again, is we changed our gear because our air gauge was on our hip because we had hip-mounted regulators. We changed SCBAs and put lights in them so you'd have a heads-up display so you could see how much air you have. You said it earlier. It's like we have to be able to make the same mistake and then to see the consequences of it. We can't take other people's misfortune and then incorporate it into our routine. So until I have to breathe smoke and almost die, it's not going to make any sense to me. You can't teach people high-risk activities that way. They're going to end up dying. I mean, we don't teach people how to scuba dive. I'll keep going back to those things. How to parachute, none of that. You got to have all your shit together when you cross that threshold. I mean, it's just the truth of the matter. You're kind of on your own when you break that barrier. So you better be doing everything right. That's why we say that. If the shit goes wrong, if you're not doing it all right, you're not going to recover from it.
Any other significant data that we want to bring up from this that we think our listeners would get something out of?
When you go through the significant data, there was some numbers in here that I think are worth looking at. You know, the lack of a 360, 70% of the time, 86% having a battalion chief or somebody on scene. Again, are they in command? What stage are they in? And when you look at the numbers, 82% of those ICs only have one person in the car. A very, very small percentage of those folks actually have a support officer or a field incident technician in there with them. You know, when you look at the 63% of the firefighters enter the structure without a hose line, 59% of the time you had 16 to 29 firefighters on scene. 54% of the folks were on an overtime assignment. And when you look at the shift work, this is a pretty big deal. 77% of the Maydays were in the second half of somebody's 24-hour shift. Now that's a pretty big number. 69% were in the second half of somebody's 48-hour shift. So once you're started extending those work cycles, going past that 12 to 24, that 24 to 48, there's a lot of things that start to go wrong. In the back in that part 2 of the study, you start looking at sleep deprivation and some of the other problems that are really starting to creep their head in the fire service. So those are some of the pretty big ones that are out there. I think some of the other numbers that support what we're doing, you look at the Mayday rescue piece, 48% of the Maydays were self-rescue. They were able to get themselves out of the structure. 24% were the crew being able to get the Mayday, their own firefighters crew, get them out, and 16% another interior crew. So the number actually went up from 86 to 88% having an interior crew be able to deal with that Maydays. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is 57% of the interior crews either just walked them out or escorted them walking them out. So there wasn't having to do any real formal rescue. It's just being able to get in, locate somebody who was missing, and get them on a line or on a wall and get them out of the structure.
So I mean, that comes back to the help order. I mean, what you just described is just a straight help order, right? You know, help the firefighter, have the company, help firefighter's company help them, have another company inside help them, and the last resort to send that company from the outside to actually, solve the problem. So that just lets us really start to solve the problem sooner by getting a company that's already inside the building in the area or close to where that person's operating to get them headed out of the building.
It took us 3 years of going through the recovery process, 2.5 to 3 years in Phoenix to figure that out. the rapid intervention piece it's not rapid. It doesn't work. It was well intentioned. It was maybe the right thing to do at the time because we didn't know anything else to do. But coming out of that fire, it became, you think, no, man, the problem ain't having a crew to rescue them. It's once you get into the position you're in, you ain't getting out. It's too deep at that point. You're committed. You're done. It's over. So, and again, it was, like I said, something that simple with a group of people that were one of the pioneers of rapid intervention. It took us that long. I mean, so you can see the smoke we're looking at all this through.
Yeah, not only is it not rapid, only 8% of the rescues were actually performed by a dedicated RIC or RIT team. And of those, 1 in every 12 RIC deployments in Project Mayday study had the Mayday of their own. So not only is it not going to be quick, the efficacy of it isn't nearly as strong as using that help order of getting either the firefighter themselves, the firefighter's company, or an interior crew to provide that assistance.
Well, and I think one of the things you're saying is if you can solve it very early, you're doing everything right, then that's where you're solving it, where you're walking them out. And where that's not possible, they're stuck more, that's where the RIC's having to come in and help to extricate them, and whatever grabbed them in the first place is what's grabbing your RIC then. So it's just, you have a high risk Mayday you're trying to pull off, and about 10% of the time you're going to have a second Mayday as part of that, trying to deal with that thing in whatever kind of hazard zone you got going on.
Jeff and Josh has done an excellent job with our Mayday management workshops, getting this information out there. This is some updated information. How are we going to update some of our blue card instructors and our folks who have been through that process already so they have this latest information?
So I think we can probably take a two-pronged approach to how we're going to deal with this. One, Nick talked about an article doing the after action report for the upcoming B shifter. My intent is to write an article really outlining, and I've talked to Don about it and make sure he was okay with us using the data. And he says, use whatever you want. But we're going to do a continuing education piece that'll be in the next B shifter that'll focus on this information. So they'll get that out there as well. But the Mayday operations overview has already been updated, and it's already in the instructor download center. So anybody who wants that information can go pull it from there. And again, if you want to get it directly from the horse's mouth, go to projectmayday.net. And you can pull up all the reports and see some 700 slides that are associated with the new data from 2015 to 2021.
On the blue card side, what the good thing about it is like nothing really changes on the Mayday end. It's still the same. This causes it, but we take the same action and manage in the same way to help prevent that. So really, it's just kind of bringing people up to date. These are the latest numbers. And I think Jeff said it earlier, is God knows how many there really were. I mean, this may only represent 5-10% of what's going on out there. I mean, you just don't know. There's not a system that forces the report of a Mayday. So it's a lot of green sky.
Timeless tactical truth. This one is the 8 of clubs. And it says, confirm command assumption as soon as you arrive, and then act and sound like command on the radio. But before Bruno left us, he was working on a thing called Cool Command, and it really talked a lot about command presence. Let's talk about the importance of command presence and acting like command if you are in command.
You know, one of the things we talked about in one of these last podcasts, Garrison brought it up, was George Pickett in New York City. And he was responsible for a period of time of studying all their Maydays. And so he would go do the after action report. And one of the most interesting things he pulled out of that is he would interview the firefighter or the crew that had the Mayday. And they would go through the algorithm, you know, you have the Mayday and, you know, you do X, Y, and Z. And he says, okay, you go through that, but still, what is it in your mind that, what freezes it for you that it's going to go good or go bad? And he said every single one of them said, well, if, all things being equal, it's going to be the incident commander. It's whoever's running that fire once they found out that I was in trouble, whether I was going to get out or not. I mean, and this is like in the 70s he was doing this work. So, I mean, it goes back that far. That's kind of before incident command even. It was just the chief who was running the thing. So I think that's a big piece of that.
I mean, I think you validate yourself when you're the incident commander as far as having command presence is when the companies that are working know that you know what is going on and where they are, and that you're taking care of them and you're making decisions based off of really the strategic decision-making model. I think that validates yourself. And then people are willing to listen to you and do what you want them to do because they know that what you're doing is in their best interest. So, I mean, I think that's an important piece. So I think what you said, the whole staying calm, that's a big deal. If one person starts screaming, everybody else starts screaming, right? And when we've got quite a bit of radio traffic from all kinds of incidents that the incident commanders are very calm. It's going all the way through strategic shifts. I mean, a company was kind of giving a little scream on the radio. The incident commander came back and said, all right, yeah, we're changing strategies. We got an all clear of all 3 floors of this apartment building. Exit the building immediately. And after he said that, all the rest of the companies, calmed back down. Like, okay, this is going to be okay. And that same thing with Maydays. We've heard Mayday traffic where the incident commander really used the help order, talked to that firefighter that was having a problem, and really just reassured him, we're coming to get you. And it painted a totally different picture than what you hear when the incident commander really doesn't know what's going on and is all amped up and isn't really working to solve the problem. They're part of the problem.
The people I always respected, thought more of, felt comfortable with were the ICs that ran the incident, where you knew they were in charge of the thing. And they could look at it and they figured out we need this here, and then this to happen. And that's the way they managed it. They were calm, they were cool, they didn't yell and scream on the radio. They were just pretty matter of fact. But they also didn't take any shit either. It was the people screaming, they would calm them down. People would suggest stupid things. They tell them no, do X, Y, and Z. Those ICs really didn't have problems because they managed in such a way that they just eliminated them pretty much, for the most part. And when they did, they dealt with it immediately. They were the same ICs that after the thing was over, they were going to do an after action hot wash, whatever it was. They were going to at least spend a couple minutes with everybody, letting them know, okay, this went really well. This went blah, 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 blah. They took care of their own tactical business, I guess. And then there was another group that wasn't that way. And so the task level would outperform them. We'd put the fire out and everybody feel good and we go home. So, but you knew the difference between the two. I mean, it was well known throughout the organization.
Yeah, that IC with a strong command presence really makes or breaks what's going on that fire ground. When you talk about that calming impact they have, when you know somebody's in command, and if you look at the flip side of that, we all know, and we see it, it's riddled in the line of duty death reports. When there isn't a strong command presence, what the firefighters on the fire ground tend to do. And that's they tend to take action into their own hands. It becomes uncoordinated. It becomes part of a plan, part of something that's really not planned at all. It's not part of an IEP. It's freelancing. It becomes chaos. So that command presence means everything on the fire ground, especially as it applies to firefighter safety and health.
Command presence starts with IC number 1, a good initial radio report with an incident action plan to start off an incident that sounds calm, coherent, and you actually have a plan and a way that you're starting off, not behind the 8 ball, has a cascading effect throughout that incident.
What'd the shovel say? If it starts off shitty, it ends shitty.
Thank you for joining us on today's conversation. If you've got something out of this episode and you have not subscribed already, please click the subscribe button and tell a friend about us. Helps us grow this podcast. Thanks to Nick, Josh, and Jeff for hanging out with us today. Till next time, thanks so much for listening to Bee Shifter. Please be safe.